The Desert and the Sea. 977 days captive on the Somali pirate coast. Written by Michael Scott Moore. Introduction. The Sea that Became a Prison. The ocean was calm, a mirror of blue stretching endlessly beneath the sun. Then, on the horizon, came the small black speck, a skiff cutting fast across the water. At first it looked harmless, another fishing boat. Then the men stood up, their rifles glinting in the light, their faces covered. In moments, the quiet turned to terror. The men shouted as they drew closer, orders in Somali, anger in every gesture. Michael Scott Moore, an American journalist traveling with Somali colleagues, raised his hands as the pirates climbed aboard. The sea had changed, from open freedom to enclosed danger. The ropes, the yelling, the heat, everything moved with frightening speed. Within minutes, he was no longer a reporter on assignment. He was a hostage. The pirate's boat sped back toward the coast, leaving behind the expanse of the Indian Ocean. Each wave brought him closer to a world he barely understood. On shore, the men shouted to one another, brandishing weapons as if this capture were a routine harvest. The irony was brutal. He had come to Somalia to tell stories of piracy, and now he was living one. By the time they reached land, night was falling. The salt stung his wrists, the air thick with diesel and fear. The sea that had always meant freedom now marked the beginning of captivity. In that moment, he understood something simple and terrible. A line had been crossed, and there was no going back. Chapter 1. The Coastline of Danger. The days before the kidnapping had been deceptively ordinary. The coast of Puntland shimmered with light, brilliant, harsh, and deceptive. Fishing boats rocked lazily in turquoise bays. To outsiders it seemed peaceful. But beneath the surface, law and order had dissolved into survival. For years, piracy had grown from desperation into industry. Coastal communities, once sustained by fishing, had been ruined by foreign trawlers and toxic dumping. The young men who once worked the sea had turned to hijacking ships. They saw it as justice, taking from those who had taken their waters. Michael had come to Somalia out of curiosity and conviction. He wanted to understand the people behind the headlines, how fishermen became outlaws, how a country once torn by war had birthed a global criminal economy. He believed that telling their story might reveal something about the world's hidden inequalities. But he had underestimated how fragile his safety was. On that coastline, every foreigner was a prize. Every visit was a gamble between empathy and danger. He had come seeking understanding. Instead, he would come to understand captivity. Chapter 2. The Kidnapping. Captivity began not with a cell, but with confusion. The pirates were young, armed, and restless. Some laughed, others shouted. They didn't seem sure what to do with their prize. The group that captured him belonged to a network, businessmen of the shadows, brokers of ransom. For them, a hostage was both currency and power. The first days were chaos. He was moved between huts and trucks, blindfolded, watched at all hours. The pirates talked about dollars, clans, and negotiations. They argued over who owned him. In their world, life had value, but only as leverage. He learned quickly that fear must be managed. Panic wasted energy. Each morning he counted breaths, traced thoughts, built small routines, anything to resist the unraveling of time. Captivity, he discovered, is made not only of ropes and guards, but of silence and waiting. Days stretched into weeks, the mind bent around uncertainty. Even in the early weeks, he began to see patterns. The men were not monsters. Some were cruel, others kind. Many were trapped in cycles of poverty and violence, unable to imagine another life. They spoke of religion, of family, of hunger. The distance between them and him was enormous, yet within that distance flickered small recognitions, the human need to be seen, to be heard, to belong. Chapter 3: Captivity and Survival. Months passed in a blur of heat and hunger. The pirates moved him through villages and camps, deeper into the arid interior. The desert replaced the sea. Each new location was the same: thin mats, guarded nights, promises that the ransom negotiations were almost done. Time became liquid. There were no clocks, no calendars, only the rhythm of sunrise and sunset. He lost track of days, then of weeks. The body adapted to scarcity. The mind fought against despair. He spoke to himself, wrote imaginary letters, recited fragments of memory. In that confinement, the mind became its own landscape, both refuge and trap. Some guards treated him with rough compassion. They offered food, sometimes shared stories. Others were violent, unpredictable. The tension was constant. Moments of uneasy laughter followed by sudden threats. His survival depended not only on endurance, but on reading moods, anticipating danger, and maintaining a fragile neutrality. In the stillness of the desert nights, he realized that captivity was not just about loss of movement, it was about the collapse of meaning. Every day repeated the same hopeless promise. Soon, you will go home. Hope became both medicine and poison. To believe too much risked heartbreak. To believe too little risked madness. Chapter 4: Between Hostage and Human. After many months, something strange happened. The line between captor and captive blurred. Living side by side, the pirates ceased to be abstractions. They became individuals, each with fears, loyalties, and contradictions. Some were teenagers who had never left Somalia, who knew only the desert, the sea, and the gun. They argued about money, fought among themselves, prayed, and laughed. One spoke of wanting to study engineering. Another dreamed of building a house for his mother. Their world was narrow, yet their desires were painfully familiar. In long hours of silence, he found himself both hating and pitying them. Their cruelty was mixed with ignorance, their violence with despair. Captivity had turned them into tools of an economy that exploited their poverty. He saw how the system used them: local bosses, foreign financiers, even middlemen in Nairobi or Dubai who profited from ransom deals. The pirates were soldiers of a broken world economy, and he was their hostage not just in Somalia, but in a global chain of inequality. Understanding this did not free him, but it made him less alone. Seeing his captors as human, even in their brutality, gave him something to hold on to, a fragile sense of moral order in a place that had none. Chapter 5: The Meaning of Freedom. After years in captivity, freedom began to seem unreal, a rumor from another life. He dreamed of open doors, of walking unguarded through streets, of speaking without fear. Yet he also feared freedom itself. What would be left of him when this ended? Would the world still make sense? In captivity, time had been both enemy and companion. It had stripped away illusions, forced him to see what remained when everything was taken. He discovered that freedom is not merely movement, but meaning, the ability to act, to choose, to shape one's days. Without that, life shrinks into survival. He thought often about other prisoners, those trapped not by pirates, but by poverty, by systems, by the invisible prisons of their own societies. Captivity had made him sensitive to every form of confinement. He began to see that the world outside was full of invisible cages. the kind built from fear, greed, and indifference. By the time his ransom was finally negotiated, he no longer believed in simple rescue. Freedom would not be a return to the old self. It would be a reconstruction, as painful as the captivity that preceded it. Chapter 6. Release and Reckoning. When the day of release came, it arrived like disbelief. The men gathered, armed and tense. He was led out to a waiting car, driven through endless stretches of desert. The landscape looked the same as ever, dry, endless, shimmering. But something had shifted. The guards avoided his eyes. They had been his jailers for nearly 3 years, and now they were letting him go. The exchange was brief. Money for man. No one spoke of morality, only transaction. In the next hours, he was flown out of Somalia. The plane lifted off, and the coastline appeared below, the same sea that had once betrayed him. Freedom felt unreal, like stepping from one dream into another. Back in the world, life had not paused. People talked, worked, argued, lived. Yet he carried the weight of stillness inside him. Noise felt unbearable, choices overwhelming. The return to freedom was its own kind of captivity, the struggle to belong again. He often thought of the men who had held him. Some had vanished, others likely continued their trade. The desert had kept its secrets. But he also thought of what captivity had revealed, that even in the most brutal circumstances, human connection, however small, however temporary, could still exist. Conclusion. The desert and the sea. Freedom and captivity are not opposites, but mirrors. The desert stripped him of everything: pride, comfort, control. The sea that had once symbolized freedom became the path to his confinement. Yet from that collision came a new understanding of the human condition. That survival is not just endurance, but the refusal to let meaning die. In the long silence of those 977 days, he discovered that dignity is quieter than courage. It is found in small decisions: to stay calm, to remember a song, to imagine a sunrise. The pirates took his freedom, but they could not dictate the meaning he made from it. The story ends with rescue, but its heart lies elsewhere, in the recognition that captivity lives within every society that forgets its shared humanity. Somalia's broken coasts and the world's indifference are part of the same landscape. To tell this story is not only to remember what happened in one desert or one sea, but to remind us that the boundary between victim and survivor, between despair and hope, is thinner than we ever imagine. Thanks for listening.
Did you enjoy this book summary? Got ideas on how we can make it even better? Drop us a quick note. We're always listening and learning from you.